The heavy oak door swung open with a whisper, and Marcus Blackwell stepped into the marble foyer of his Fifth Avenue penthouse, exhausted from another grueling day of negotiations in Tokyo. At 52, he had built an empire from nothing, tech innovations that changed how the world communicated, investments that could shift markets with a single signature. But as he loosened his Italian silk tie and set down his briefcase, he realized the house was too quiet. His daughter Elena should be at her piano by now, filling the corridors with Chopin. His son David should be shouting at his gaming screen, the familiar sounds of teenage chaos echoing from upstairs. Instead, there was only silence, broken by hushed voices drifting from an unexpected place, the kitchen. Marcus frowned. In 15 years of living in this penthouse, he couldn't remember the last time anyone had actually used that kitchen beyond the staff preparing meals. He moved quietly down the hallway, his confusion deepening as he detected the scent of something burning, followed by Elena's frustrated sigh and David's gentle laughter. What he saw when he reached the doorway stopped him cold, rooting him to the marble floor as if his $1,000 shoes had been nailed there. Elena, his brilliant 18-year-old adopted daughter who had gotten early acceptance to Juilliard, stood at the stove wearing an apron covered in flour and what appeared to be tomato sauce. Her usually immaculate dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and there were smudges of something on her cheek. Beside her, David, his 20-year-old biological son who had just completed his sophomore year at Columbia, was chopping vegetables with the intense concentration of someone defusing a bomb, his expensive watch pushed up his forearm, his designer shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "No, no, you have to dice them smaller," Elena was saying, reaching over to guide David's hands. "Mrs. Chen always said the smaller the pieces, the more flavor they release." Marcus felt his throat tighten at the mention of their former housekeeper, the woman who had been with their family for over a decade before retiring last month to care for her own ailing mother in Queens. "I'm trying," David protested good-naturedly, examining his handiwork. "But I don't understand why we can't just order from that Italian place you like." Elena shook her head firmly, stirring something in a pot that was definitely not cooperating with her vision. "Because this isn't about convenience, David. Mrs. Chen used to tell me how she learned to cook from her grandmother, how every meal was an act of love. I never understood what she meant until..." She trailed off, her voice catching slightly. "Until what?" David prompted gently, setting down his knife. "Until I realized Dad hasn't had a home-cooked meal since she left," Elena said softly. "Everything is catered, ordered in, prepared by strangers who don't know that he hates capers or that he's allergic to shellfish or that he always picks the raisins out of his rice pilaf when he thinks no one's looking. I thought maybe we could try." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, some carefully constructed wall he hadn't even known he'd built. He watched David reach over and squeeze his sister's shoulder, the same protective gesture he'd been making since the day Marcus had brought 7-year-old Elena home from the adoption agency, a frightened child who'd spent 3 years in foster care after her parents died in a car accident. "That's actually really beautiful, David said, and Marcus heard the thickness in his son's voice. "I'm in, even if we burn down this kitchen trying." "We're not going to burn down anything," Elena insisted, though smoke was definitely rising from one of the pans. "Well, probably not. Maybe. Okay, grab the fire extinguisher just in case." They both burst into laughter, and Marcus felt his eyes burning with tears he hadn't shed in years, not since the day his wife Catherine had died when David was only 5, not since he'd held Elena for the first time and promised he'd give her the family she deserved, not since he'd become so consumed with building his business that he'd forgotten what he was building it for. He must have made a sound, or perhaps they simply felt his presence, because both Elena and David suddenly turned to face him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Elena's eyes widened with something that looked like panic. "Dad, you're home early." This was supposed to be a surprise. "The kitchen is kind of a disaster," David added quickly, gesturing at the chaos of ingredients, pots, pans, and what appeared to be an exploded bag of flour on the counter. "We were going to clean up before you." "Stop," Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. He stepped into the kitchen, looking around at the beautiful mess his children had created. On the counter, he spotted a handwritten recipe card in Mrs. Chen's distinctive handwriting, and beside it, a tablet displaying a YouTube video titled, "How to Make the Perfect Marinara Sauce." There were onions everywhere, a burned pot soaking in the sink, and what looked like an entire container of oregano spilled across the counter. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I thought, Marcus began, then had to stop and clear his throat. I thought I was giving you everything. The best schools, the finest music teachers, every opportunity money could buy. I thought that's what being a good father meant, providing, protecting, making sure you never wanted for anything. Elena and David exchanged glances, and Marcus saw tears forming in his daughter's dark eyes. But you were trying to cook dinner, he continued, moving closer to them. You were learning from Mrs. Chen's recipes, burning pans, making a mess, because you wanted to do something kind for me. Something personal. Something that can't be bought or ordered or delegated to someone else. We just wanted you to have something that felt like home, Elena whispered. Like family. I know I'm not really your. Don't, Marcus said sharply, reaching out to cup her flour-dusted face in his hands. Don't you ever finish that sentence. You are my daughter. The moment I held you, you became as much a part of me as I am, David finished, moving to stand beside them. She's my sister, Dad. My real sister. Biology doesn't matter. Marcus pulled them both into his arms, something he realized with shame he hadn't done in far too long. His children, his brilliant, kind, selfless children, who had learned to be generous despite growing up with everything, who understood that love was measured not in trust funds and prestigious schools but in burned marinara sauce and shared laughter and the willingness to fail spectacularly while trying to do something beautiful for someone else. I'm the one who's supposed to take care of you, he said into Elena's hair, and here you are, taking care of me. That's what family does, Elena said simply. That's what Mrs. Chen taught me. That's what Mom would have wanted. They stood there in the wreckage of the kitchen, holding each other, and Marcus felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of wealth. He had spent decades accumulating billions, building towers and companies and legacies, but he had been so poor in the ways that truly mattered. So, he said finally, pulling back and looking at the chaos surrounding them, what are we making? Elena's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. Mrs. Chen's famous chicken piccata. Well, attempting to make it. Without the capers, obviously. And possibly without burning down the building, David added with a grin. Marcus shed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and moved to the sink. Then we'd better get to work. But first, someone should probably rescue whatever's smoking in that pan. They spent the next 3 hours in that kitchen, making mistakes, laughing, consulting Mrs. Chen's recipe cards and increasingly panicked Google searches, burning 2 more pans and somehow getting flour on the ceiling. The chicken piccata was simultaneously overdone and undercooked, the vegetables were cut into wildly inconsistent sizes, and the sauce had an unfortunate lumpy quality that defied all their attempts to fix it. It was the best meal Marcus had ever eaten. As they sat at the kitchen counter, not the formal dining room, eating their imperfect creation off mismatched plates, Marcus looked at his children and realized what he'd been missing while he was busy conquering the world. This was the real return on investment. This was the legacy that mattered. Tomorrow, he announced, we're doing this again. Really? Elena asked, her eyes shining. Really? And next week, we're personally thanking Mrs. Chen for teaching us what it means to be a family. David raised his water glass in a toast. To coming home. To being home, Marcus corrected, clinking his glass against his children's. Finally.